Hi there, so we're going to have a look at animation and variables a little bit more. What I've got here is I have set up a variable called y, and I'm using this variable as the y position of an ellipse. The width position, or the x position of the ellipse is set to be the width over 2. And if you remember, width is the width of the canvas that's been created. So width over 2, we'll place it in the middle. Let's just have a look. Here it is. Notice that if I make my canvas wider, that, oops, I need a comma there. My ellipse still stays in the middle of my screen because I'm setting it to the width, which is whatever this is, divided by 2. So that always centers it, especially for an ellipse where the anchor point is in the middle of the ellipse. My ellipse size is 10 by 10. Okay, so we can animate this how we did before by adding 1 to y as the loop goes on. So let's go y plus equals 1. And now my circle falls, but it falls off the bottom of the page and it keeps going. So what I need to do is I need to use conditional logic, and I want to check if the circle, if the value of y, which is what's setting its position, is equal to or the height here, which would be 400 in this instance, then I want to reset y to be 0 again. So conditional statements let you test something, and if that value is true, it will perform the code inside that conditional statement. We write them like this. So I say if, I'm just going to turn off auto refresh while I do this because it's going to keep giving me errors. So I say if, and then I open and close some brackets, and inside those brackets I put the condition that I want to test for. So I want to test for y, if y is equal to, and notice here that I'm putting 2 equal signs, and that's because one equal sign is used for assigning values, as you can see up here. So to say something is equal to a value, I use the double equal signs. So if y is equal to height, and then I open curly brackets, and whatever I want to happen if this value is true, if y does equal the height, I put inside of here. So if y is equal to the height, I want to just reset y so it starts at the top again. So I'm going to say y equals 0. And now if we play this, it gets down to the bottom and then it starts again. So in this way we can have sort of a looping animation. So maybe you want to pause the video now and have a go at doing that. Maybe you could try adding a few circles or other shapes and make them move either up and down the screen or across the screen by copying this code and altering the values within it. Okay, so now you're back. One other useful tool is the console log. So you can see down here in the bottom of my screen is the console. And when there's errors, that's where my error messages come up to try and help me out. I can also send information to the console. So if I want to know what the value of y is at any given point, I can use the console log to print this data down here. To do that, I type in console.log, and then in these brackets here, I put the value that I want to log. And in this case, I want to know the value of y. And this is going to update every frame. So let's stop this and play it again. And you can see it's going up as it goes down the screen. And once we get to the bottom of the screen, it's going back to 0. So console is a really useful way to debug or to try and understand what's going on. So we might want to think about how we can give this circle more character. Right now it's just falling, and I wanted to introduce you to the random function. So random lets you work with a random value from within a minimum and maximum. So for example, let's actually not do the width to be 2 for now. Let's change how the exposition works. Oh, actually, no, yeah, let's change how the exposition works. So I'm going to add a new variable and I'm going to call it x, and I'll start it at 0 as well. And now if we stop that, it's it's not being used yet, so it's still working on width over 2. I'm going to change this to here now, and we're going to see that the x value changes to the edge here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to keep x to equal the width over 2 like I had before, but you notice if I type it up here, so you might go width over 2, great. You can see that I'm getting an error, that width is not defined. And the reason this is that width doesn't get defined until function runs, whereas this is happening beforehand. So I'm just going to put 0 back here, and I'm actually going to then redefine width inside the setup function. Now remember, this runs once at startup, so it's going to set it up to start with this x value, and then it's going to allow me to change it later on. So I'm going to here say x equals width over 2, and you can see it's now back in the center again. So this might seem like a bit of faffing around, but this is to set up to a nice little wiggle or something like that. Okay, so I can set a wiggle by using the random function. So the random function is written like this, random, and then inside the brackets you put the minimum value. I'm just going to go -1, and we'll see this in action in a second. And then I put the maximum value. Now this isn't doing anything here just because it's on its own. Probably give me an error. No, it's not giving me an error. So what I want to do is I want to change the value of x with this random number. So I can add in here x equals x plus random. And you can see I've got this little sort of jiggle happening now. I could play around with these values. What if we made it -5 and 5? And so in this instance now, x is adding -5. It's adding a number between -5 and 5 to the value of x. So it's altering it, either taking away from it or adding to it. And so we get a much bigger jiggle. I'm going to go back to here, -1 and 1, just for that sort of nice little jiggle. Random can be interesting in lots of ways, and we're going to start using it quite a lot. You can put random anywhere. So instead of my ellipse size being 10, I could say that I want it to be random, I don't know, 5 to 10. Oops, and we need to close this bracket here. And you can see that the size, let's make this bigger just so you can see, because this is being drawn every frame, we get this sort of shaky size thing happening, which isn't exactly what we want. There would be better ways to do this. But just as an example of what you can do with random, and maybe that's an effect that you like. Might be something you want to play around with your patterns. Okay, so I'm just going to put this back to 10 for now. One other thing I'd like to mention is the background function here. So the background function says that the background is set to 255, so that's white. And that is what, because this redraws every time, the background is refreshed every time with the circle on top of it. And I'm just going to comment out the background to show you how that looks without it. So without the background, you actually leave behind a trail of circles, and this might be something that you're interested in as well. Now, it might be more fortuitous to use sort of a wider random functions, and we can get sort of start to draw on our screen. Now, if I leave this going, I'm going to end up with a generated image from the randomness. Personally, I quite like that. Now if we put random back in here, so random, let's go 10 to 100 and close those brackets. And again, I'm getting quite a different line. I'm just going to put this back to 10. So have a play around with the random values, and also look at how you can use variables to control the way that it animates, or to control that it comes back on the screen. So now let's introduce one more variable into this sketch. So what I would like to do now is I would actually like to change, I'll just stop this, I'd like to change the circles action so that instead of falling down and then starting again at the top, that we create sort of a back and forward bounce action. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to play around with the speed. So essentially the speed is controlled by this number here. Remember before when we made it a larger number, the circle moved much faster, or if we made it a decimal number or less than 1, it started to move more slowly. So here instead of, here I'm going to create a variable called speed, and I'm going to start with it equaling 1. And now instead of saying +1 here, I'm just going to say speed. And let's just check. Everything sort of looks as it should. Also, it's really good to check everything as you add new lines of code, just so it helps you understand what's going on, but it also helps you catch any issues. And as you can see here, like there's often issues or small things mistyped. So part of learning this is really a process of learning how to debug things. Okay, so now beforehand we were using if y is equal to the height, we're going to reset it to 0. And what we can do now instead is if y is equal to the height, instead of y equaling 0, we can say speed equals speed times -1. So that's going to reverse the value. And let's just see here. I'm not sure if this is going to bounce back. Up it goes. And off the screen it goes. So we need a way for it to come back again. So one way we can do this is by adding to our conditional statement. We can say if y is equal to height, we turn the speed around, and then we can add what's called an else if statement, and it's part of the same statement, and it checks if this condition isn't met, it then checks for this condition. So else if y is equal to 0, so we're back up the top, speed equals speed times 1. So instead of timesing by multiple of 1, it's times by 1. Okay, and I think I might need to times it by -1 again actually, because timesing a negative number by 1 will keep it as a negative number. Let's hope this works. There we go. So now we have our circle moving up and down the screen. And drawing some nice kind of pictures for us.